Alrighty, on today's episode of Faith in Focus, I want to talk about a couple articles I read on a couple Christian posts. I think Christianity Today, I think were the two sources, but I'll link them in the show notes regardless. But what shocked me was not necessarily the content. I mean, it was kind of standard, content that you would see on Christian media, Christian news, of like lawsuits going on and stuff like that. But what struck me was that they were just like right at the top. There was just a lot, and I just picked three, but I think there was like three or four in the feed on the Christian Post. There was a couple over on Christianity Today, and I just thought, this is ridiculous. These lawsuits going on between Christians, and of course it's plastered all over the news and it's being reported on. And I just thought, like, does 1 Corinthians 6 just not apply? And so it just got me thinking, and we'll look at 1 Corinthians 6, obviously. It's, a very classic passage about Christians going to court with other Christians, and we'll take a look at that, and I want to take a look at the other articles that are the three articles that I saw, and I just thought, this is kind of shameful. And of course, some of the stuff going on in the articles is shameful, of course, but I just thought, like, man, does this really need to be plastered all over the news for people to see? I mean, this is the spirit that's in 1 Corinthians 6, is that not in play here? That, hey, this is kind of embarrassing for the church. It reveals a flaw, and that is kind of more what I want to focus on this episode is, what is going on? What's the heart and the motive behind this? What is undergirding these lawsuits? Not the validity of any of them, or the rights or the wrongs of anything going on, but why are these happening? What is the structure that's in play? And of course, as I was reading the Christianity Today article, I just realized, well, what it is the flaw that I've been highlighting in the past several episodes on this podcast, of just the way that the church operates lends itself to these problems. These problems are just a natural outworking of the problems that these institutions are going to have. It's inevitable because of the way that they're structured. It's that leadership and self-deception that I've talked about, that book, that idea of someone being in a box, a leader or an institution thinking inside of a box, and they're doing everything that they know how to do, and they know everything that they can figure out how to do. It's still leading to these perennial problems that crop up because, I mean, what else is going to happen? They're operating in a flawed system. So with that being said, I want to take a look at this first article. And again, I'm not commenting necessarily on the validity of the cases being brought and the wrongness of the people involved. I mean, obviously, if there's a lawsuit going on, there's something wrong has happened. So I don't want to necessarily comment on that. But this first one, ex-SBC, so that's Southern Baptist Convention President Johnny Hunt, confesses to only kissing and some awkward fondling in defamation suit. So they start off saying, former Southern Baptist Convention President Johnny Hunt has admitted to only kissing and some awkward fondling between himself and the wife of a younger minister who accused him of sexual assault while on a beach vacation with his family in Panama City, Florida, 12 years ago. The details come from a defamation lawsuit filed by Hunt's lawyers Friday in a federal court in Tennessee against multiple parties, including the SBC and the SBC Executive Committee and the Guidepost Solutions, which investigated the allegations against Hunt. So what the defamation lawsuit is in response to is this independent investigation. The Southern Baptist Convention, probably to save their own skin, brought in some outsiders to investigate accusations that were being made against leaders, and this guy Hunt was named in the accusation and was named by this woman. And what it sounds like is, they were at a beach, they were on vacation in Florida, and he says it was just kissing and fondling and awkward, inappropriate, clearly. He claims it was consensual. She claims it was not. And I just think, and if you go into the article and you read it, it's like, it's clear what the guy did was wrong. I mean, it was morally wrong. The question is not so much whether it was legally wrong, although that would certainly be something worth investigating. I mean, that would be certainly a criminal investigation if it was actual sexual assault. But the point that the defamation lawsuit that Hunt is filing back, he's kind of countersuing against the people who brought this suit, and they named him in it. Like it's more that his name is being maligned. Like the fact that he was named in the suit is what he took issue with, and he was like, it wasn't that big of. I mean, I'm putting words in his mouth. It's not that big of a deal. It didn't need to be named. It was, a personal flaw and an error on his part, and it didn't arise to sexual assault. He didn't need to be named in this thing. So he seems to be a little bit upset that his name is being dragged through the mud. And of course, in these countersuit defamation lawsuits, you have to prove cause. He's lost speaking engagements. He's lost all this different stuff. But in the article, to go back to it, he does say, I don't know if it's in this one or if it's in one of the linked ones. He was named because the woman he was with had the brief extramarital encounter, disclosed the encounter to the guidepost. It says, in January, 6 months after he was suspended as pastor emeritus by First Baptist Church Woodstock in Georgia, following an investigation into allegations he sexually assaulted younger pastor's wife, Hunt returned to public preaching and declared that God's call on his life is irrevocable. So this idea that, hey, I'm a pastor, I was called by God, and he makes his argument, which, in a theologically, consistent sort of way, makes a bit of sense. I mean, he talks about, well, if God called me to be a pastor 40 years ago, God knew that what was going to happen, this marital infidelity, this act of indiscretion, and God still called me knowing that was going to happen. So God must not care, I guess, that that this thing happened. Can be completely ignoring the fact that Paul does say, I discipline myself, I beat my body, I train myself so that I myself will not be disqualified. He's talking about preaching the gospel and being a minister of the gospel. There is an element to which a person becomes disqualified. So, I mean, this Hunt guy can say all he wants, well, the calling of God on my life is irrevocable. It's like, well, you can use the word irrevocable if you want. Paul uses the word disqualified, and he seems to think a person can become disqualified. Hunt doesn't seem to think so. So, again, I don't know the guy. I don't know the situation. Not necessarily weighing in on the situation. But to me, it seems like he's filing a defamation lawsuit because he got named in the report. That his name got dragged through the mud. So the defamation lawsuit is, I'm being defamed. My name is being dragged through the mud. So I'm going to countersue you and, I guess, recover lost damages against the Southern Baptist Convention, Southern Baptist Committee that did this investigation, guidepost, whoever it might be, the named litigants. I guess he's wanting lost money from speaking engagements and all that kind of stuff. I mean, whatever church he's involved in apparently let him right back in the door. So doesn't seem to be lost any speaking engagements there. But again, why would you just take the L, man? Like, this is pretty bad. Well, another one that had cropped up on the on Christian Post, right under this one. 38 churches suing Maryland-based UMC, United Methodist Church Conference, over disaffiliation process. A group of 38 congregations that have decided to leave the United Methodist Church over theological issues have sued the denomination over objections to the process of disaffiliation. So the United Methodist Church, again, I'm not a part of the organization, but from what I've seen and what I've heard, they're just hemorrhaging members, just because the United Methodist Church is like the Southern Baptist Convention. It's like these massive worldwide institutions that have a large umbrella of thousands and thousands of churches. Well, because Protestants have a hard time agreeing with one another about anything, these churches don't agree as they get bigger and bigger, and they become encompassing larger swaths of people. they're starting to have these disagreements, and now one side of the United Methodist Church is sanctioning homosexuality and preachers being homosexual and marriage and all that kind of stuff. And then the more conservative side is saying we don't want any part of this. So they've been having votes for probably close to a decade now, with some churches saying, hey, listen, we're not going this way. We're not sanctioning this. We're not going to allow this. And the more progressive side is saying, yeah, we are. And this kind of came to a kerfuffle when this came to a vote, I don't know, probably 5-6 years ago, of, what is the United Methodist Church going to sanction homosexuality and agree with homosexuality and all that kind of stuff, or are they not? So the leaders of all these independent regions, again, I don't know what they, not diocese, but, that concept, they all came together and they had their voting procedure, and this was a worldwide thing. And the Western churches, you think of like, Europe, America, and that kind of stuff, they were very progressive and left-leaning. And it was more of the African churches that were more conservative, saying, we're not doing this. And the United Methodist Church, the kind of the left side of the progressive side of things, was saying, if we vote on this and you lose, you're going to have to fall in line. And the conservative churches were basically saying, we'll leave and you can keep your money. We don't need your money. We don't want your money. If it's at the cost of this, we don't want anything to do with this. So, it was a very, and they ended up winning at that time. That vote went in the favor of the conservatives. So they hung on a little bit longer, but it keeps getting pressed and pressed and pressed. But the conservative African churches were saying, listen, we don't care. We'll walk away from this organization and follow God the way we believe he wants us to follow him. And we don't care. You can keep your money. Because that was kind of what was being held over their head, right? The African churches were more poor, and the Western European churches had a lot of the money. They were the ones saying, hey, we're paying the bill, and he who pays the piper calls the tune. So, hey, if we say gay marriage, you better fall in line, or else you won't get any money. And the African churches were like, let your silver perish with you. We're out of here. Which is probably a difficult decision, but an admirable one. But here in America, we see these churches in the Baltimore area. They're suing. They are leaving the United Methodist Church, probably over similar reasons, and they're suing because they're leaving, and in their bylaws, they probably have rules about, who owns the church building. Is the local congregation just leasing the grounds and the property and the building from the United Methodist Church as a whole, or do they own it? Do the congregants own it? In the church I go to as an independent church, we're owned, if you want to say that. It's not very good language, but the members of the church like are owners, again, so to speak, of that property. We're not beholden to anybody. But when you're in part of a bigger congregation like this, a bigger organization, it's like, who owns this stuff? Who does it go to? So if people want to break away, do they get to take the church with them and keep having their own independent church? So you might see like these free Methodist type things. They're not part of the United Methodist churches, right? So it says, last week in the Circuit Court of Maryland and Arundel County, the lawsuit accuses the UMC Baltimore Washington Conference of holding their church buildings and property hostage. Defendants claim plaintiff's church's property is encumbered by an irrevocable trust for the benefit of the UMC, and the only way for plaintiff churches to disaffiliate without surrendering the buildings and properties that are central to their congregations is by the permission of the UMC and payment of a financial ransom, argued the complaint. The position is inconsistent with the decades-long pattern and practice of the UMC to allow local churches to disaffiliate and retain their church property without paying a ransom. So what's happening is, again, I don't know the bylaws. I'm not a part of the United Methodist Church, and I'm not, again, just like the sexual assault story with Hunt, I don't really need to know the right or wrongs to look at this through like a 1 Corinthians 6 lens. This idea that like the African churches over the homosexuality issue, they were saying, we'll leave. You can have your property, you can have your buildings. We don't want your money. We want to be doing what's right in God's eyes. That was an admirable position. Again, a difficult one. And they would have been, I think, morally and theologically in the right, but they're saying, hey, I would much rather follow God and beholden to stuff like 1 Corinthians 6. We're not going to go to legal war with you over this. Why are these churches in Baltimore? Again, just, take the L. Try to obviously sort this out amongst the United Methodist Church. Why is this being brought to a legal dispute? It's troubling, and I understand our tendency is to say, well, yeah, but right needs to win out, and justice needs to be done, and so I do think when we look at 1 Corinthians 6, which I've been alluding to, maybe it's good to just hop over there and read that real quick, but I think that the point of why this is a problem is because it's not. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this because I don't want to come across as if I'm saying it's okay that like what's being done here, but the rightness or the wrongness of this situation isn't really the issue when you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6. And Paul kind of admits that. He says, and I'll come back to that article and explain what I mean. He says, does any one of you have, and this is 1 Corinthians 6:1, does any one of you, when he has a case against his neighbor, dare to go to law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? If the world is judged by you, are you not competent to constitute the smallest law courts? Do you not know that we will judge angels? How much more matters of this life? So if you have law courts dealing with matters of this life, do you appoint them as judges who are of no account in the church? I say this to your shame. Is it so that there is not among you one wise man who will be able to decide between his brethren? But brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers. So Paul's not necessarily saying, hey, it's wrong to try to settle disputes between. I mean, he's assuming that disputes are going to arise. He's assuming that there are going to be disagreements, and then there are going to be arguments, and there are things that are going to need to be litigated. But his problem is you're doing it out in the open amongst unbelievers. We as Christians believe that we are one day going to rule and reign with Christ. We are going to judge angels, as Paul says. You think of us as ruling and reigning over God's creation alongside Christ. He's saying if that's our identity, if that's who we're destined to be, can't you figure these things out yourself? I mean, is there nobody wise among you? And the sad reality is, you might understand it if it was just, someone who goes to church on Sunday. Maybe they're not as all that mature. Maybe they've not been walking with God for long. They might not know, hey, I'm not mature enough to handle this. I'm not getting taken advantage of. Yeah, I'm going to take him to court, whatever, But the problem with these lawsuits that we're seeing, I mean, these are Christian leaders. These are the people, so the answer, is there no one wise enough among you? Apparently not, because it's the people who should be the wisest and the most mature are the ones leading these lawsuits. I mean, this pastor from the Southern Baptist Convention, he's the one leading this defamation. I mean, if he's the pastor, if he's the long, decades-long leader of a church, who is there? I mean, where's the wiser person in the church? I mean, he should be the most wise. If these leaders of these United Methodist churches are the ones leading this lawsuit to try to retain their property, and they're suing the presumably just as equally, or if not more so, mature leaders of the United Methodist Church, who could you appeal to? But Paul's point is there should be wise enough people within the church to go to arbitrate between these and try to figure out, okay, what's right and what's wrong. So it's not that we're ignoring what is right and wrong. It's who we're submitting ourselves to. And that's the other issue, is because we as Protestant Christians, we have again, the Catholics have that over on us. They have a loyalty and a submission to Rome. We as Protestants say, I'm my own boss. I'm my own, I'm not going to submit to anybody. So I'll submit to you as long as I want to. But because this refusal to submit and not having this heart of submission, what would be the point of having an arbitration between elders of churches, between a leader of a denomination and elders of 38 different churches, if the people, their submission only goes so far as to submit to you when I want to? If you arbitrate in somebody else's favor, I'm not going to submit to you. I'll still do whatever I want. I'll agree with you as long as you agree with what I want to do. Submission is a big problem with this. There's nobody to submit to because we're not willing to submit to church leaders and to church elders. He says, actually, this is 1 Corinthians 6:7. Actually, then it is already a defeat for you that you have lawsuits with one another. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be defrauded? So we're not talking about just, a parking violation or something. These are serious things, being defrauded and wronged. He says, on the contrary, you yourselves are wrong, you wrong and defraud. You do this even to your brethren. If you've been a listener of Faith and Focus for a while, I would encourage you to become a supporter of the ministry by becoming a monthly donor. Your generous donations allow me to continue working within Faith and recording new content. You can find a link to my donation page in the show notes for this episode. Thank you. And again, this is not to say, in our judicial system, we have criminal lawsuits, and civil lawsuits. So this would probably be more with civil lawsuits. When in criminal lawsuits, you don't have a choice in the matter. This is not something like if an actual crime has been committed, like if somebody is raped or murdered, that's not something you can just take to the church and say, hey, church, figure this out. So that's why, I have no problem. If sexual assault is happening within the church, I don't know that is right to just cover that up and say, well, we'll just deal with this as Christians, meaning please don't tell anybody. If a crime has actually been committed, that's why when crimes like those are committed, it's usually not, Dennis Sotheby versus, the Southern Baptist Convention. It's like, I'm not the plaintiff. The plaintiff is usually the state. It's because the state is you've committed a crime against the state. So in a criminal case, that's usually, you don't have a say in the matter. It's not like we can just want to keep this quiet and keep it between the church. But usually in civil cases, they're much more, I'm suing the Southern Baptist. The state doesn't really have a say in it. They don't have necessarily a stake in it. So it's like, yeah, you guys can use the judicial system, but it's really between you guys. And it's really more in those kinds of things where it's just like, can't the church arbitrate on this? And maybe the answer is no. And as we'll see, I think that the church, because it operates the way that it does, basically does not see itself as needing to submit to the church in these kinds of areas. Doesn't need to use the church as an arbitrator between rights and wrongs. It's a defunct system, which I think cripples maturity in certain areas, which then leads to these kinds of lawsuits. Again, I'm not saying necessarily one way or the other, whether or not this United Methodist Church suing is right or wrong, or the defamation lawsuits, whether there's right or wrong. I'm assuming, people have been wronged. That goes without saying. So the really bad one, though, this is the one where I was like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. Okay. Company, this is from Christianity Today. Company that trademarked worship leader makes others drop term. And I just thought, what? Like, somebody has trademarked the term worship leader. It says popular meme accounts lose social media pages after being reported by Authentic Media, which says it coined the phrase. Worship Leader Probs was a meme account and podcast dedicated to the challenges of music ministry. But last week, its creators revealed that they've lost social media pages and had to censor their brand due to a company claiming ownership to 2 out of the 3 words in their original name. That company is Authentic Media, which runs a church resource called Worship Leader. Once a print magazine, now available online, Authentic Media holds the trademark for Worship Leader, and last year publicly stated that it planned to continue to defend our trademark, as we have for decades. The dispute between Worship Leader and Worship Leader Probs dates back to October 2022, when Authentic Media explained its concerns about the name during a phone call with the creators of the meme account. According to Joshua Swanson, editor of the Worship Leader and managing partner of Authentic Media, the company woke up to the fact that people were using our brand. And in 2022, he and others at Authentic Media became particularly concerned about brand confusion with Worship Leader Probs. It became a material issue for us, our mission, and their mission do not align, Swanson told Christianity Today. It became a major conflict. We would be at events, and people thought we were them, and they were us. The phone call last fall did not resolve things, and after months at an impasse, Authentic Media began reporting worship leader Prob's social media accounts for trademark infringement in February of 2023. So this company has coined this phrase and trademarked this phrase, worship leader. Did you know that term was trademarked? Maybe you're a worship leader at your church. Did you know that if you put worship leader so-and-so, that's a copyright infringement? Now, they say later in this article that Authentic Media is like, we're not concerned if people use the title worship leader. So basically what they're saying is, as long as you're just a small nobody who just doesn't really bother us too much, we're not going to take issue with it. But if your brand starts to interfere with our brand, well, then we'll come after you. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. Another account, it says, a third account, Rogue Worship Leader was, if you know Star Wars, Rogue Worship Leader was known for Star Wars themed memes and mashups, poking fun at the tropes and quirks of music, worship music and music ministry. Scott Leonard, the page's creator, was blindsided when his Facebook page was taken down without warning for violating community guidelines, specifically for trademark infringement. Leonard appealed to Facebook and found that it too had been reported by Authentic Media. Authentic Media told CT that it was not their intention to initiate the removal of the Star Wars-themed meme page, but that it included it in a list of similar accounts in the process of reporting worship leader Probs. Swanson claims Facebook made that decision and acted without prompting of Authentic Media. Leonard, though, the leader of the Rogue Worship Leader account, says isn't convinced that his page was just collateral damage. He told CT that he was able to confirm that 8 individual posts on his page has been reported to Facebook for copyright infringement by Authentic Media. So, if you get big enough and you've got the term worship leader anywhere branded on your stuff, Authentic Media is coming after you, so you better watch out if your church is big enough. Leonard's pursuing appeals process. I expected to have to fight off Disney and Lucasfilm, not a Christian company, said Leonard. Copyright, CCLI, there's room for all of that to maintain some order in the worship community, but this goes beyond that. And then, so here is where I think the real issue comes in. So, you listen to that, and like I think he made a point saying, like, I expected Disney to come after me, or Star Wars. Of course, they're like these multinational global businesses, billion-dollar industries that want nothing to do with Jesus. So if they're going to come after somebody, it's probably going to come after some Christian guy. But no, this is coming from your flank. This is coming from who's supposed to be on your side. Why is this happening? And I think that we're given insight later in the article as it starts to talk about churches. So going on, it says, in other trademark conflicts between Christian entities, leaders have had to weigh the importance of protecting and stewarding their brands with the desire to avoid legal fights with fellow ministries. In 2011, the former Mars Hill Church in Seattle dropped its cease and desist against a church with a similar name and logo. At the time, several executive pastors and lawyers saw some benefit to trademarking church names to avoid confusion, though Jim Tomberlin of Multi-Site Solutions told CT since most churches' names are derived from the Bible, like Mars Hill, or commonly used words, it would be difficult to trademark their name only, but it is certainly appropriate to protect a church's name and logo from those who would misrepresent it or accidentally misuse it intentionally. Since 2016, Authentic Media has owned the rights to the phrase worship leader when applied to periodicals, online publications, and websites with resources around worship. Prior to that, the trademark had been owned by Maranatha Music, worship leader's previous owner. Since 1993, the company also holds trademarks for worship leader, workshop, and song discovery. They claim to literally have coined the term worship leader. And the article goes on to say, no, it seems like it's been around since at least the 50s, which in and of itself, again, this is like a sidebar issue. This is why I don't like a lot of stuff about what I'm reading and talking about, but I don't like it. Like, what I'm doing now, okay, I'm trying to teach a principle from the Bible. Or what I do on Sunday morning or at a Bible study, I'm teaching the Bible. Is that not worship? Are we not worshiping God when we're listening to the word of God taught? Are we not worshiping God when we go out and of course, music people will say, oh, no, that's all worship. Oh, it's not just singing. But every time, this term worship leader is synonymous with song leader. I think that's terrible in and of itself. It misleads people to think that worship just means music. And as much as, because I think that song leaders and music leaders, because I think that they know branding themselves as worship leaders is not biblical, they're always quick to say, oh, no, worship can happen anywhere. Worship is when you're serving people. Worship is when you're this and that. Worship is all. But yet that term seems to always stick. And because not only is it literally branded, it's branded by the culture and the ethos of the Western church that worship equals music and singing. So a worship leader is somebody who leads music. That's, again, just a kind of a sidebar gripe that I have with that term. But so it's going on talking about, this song's been used all the way back to the 50s and 60s and stuff. Branding worship leader. Despite any questions about the origins and development of the term worship leader, Authentic Media has the trademark and therefore has a stake in protecting its worship leader brand. Our own business has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years on our trademark, wrote Swanson. We have invested in our trademark, and so we're compelled to continue to defend all of them and ensure that our investments are protected. Can I still use worship leader on my website, my Facebook group, my job title, Instagram? Yes, you can, read a post on its Instagram account on Sunday. The narrative that we are going after all accounts using worship leader is a lie and a manipulation tactic to divide the worship community. No, if you're big enough, they will come after you. If you're drawing attention and taking people off of their brand, if they view like their investment is being challenged in some way, they're going to come after you. So to me, this is where I think the problem lies. It's the church and Christians are so, the linkage between the world and the church has become so intimately tied that churches, ministries are viewed as businesses. Your branding, your logo, your trademarked title, and your name of your church. You can't have a church named Mars Hill somewhere that looks kind of like our Mars Hill. Man, it looks just like it. Look, there's an M and an A and an R and an S, H-I, 2 L's. It looks just like our sign. This is ridiculous. But what it is it's how people in the world think. Litigious people who are in business, who want to protect their investments, who want to protect their branding. It talked about in that article how Adidas and different companies, you've probably seen those shirts where they're, they're like Christian themed, but they've got logos that look similar to real logos, so it kind of catches people's attentions. Those kind of companies get hit with lawsuits all the time. But of course, worldly companies are going to do that because their mission is money and making money. And it said it earlier in the article, their mission doesn't align with ours. You're both Christian businesses. Is your mission not spreading the gospel? Well, no, it's not. Our mission is to make lots of money. That's what our mission is. And that's the purpose that we exist for. So if you're going to infringe on our purpose, then we're going to come after you. We're going to slap you with a copyright infringement. So that reveals something, right? When churches are worried about, that church might reflect poorly on us, that's a worldly way of thinking. And this is kind of the problem that I have with, I understand the world that we live in. We live in a world where we're kind of torn between the world, we live in the world, but we're Christians, so we should be Christians first. So this is the problem I've talked about with the show The Chosen. This is just an example of it. It's a business. I tell people who are like, you can't watch The Chosen. It's not biblical. It's this, that, and the other thing. And I just say, listen, if you view it as a business, and that's all it is, they're putting out entertainment. Just watch it for what it is. If you're viewing it as a ministry and outreach and a way to share the gospel, then you might have to nitpick, wait, is this biblical? Is somebody actually going to think that this is what the Bible says? The problem is the Chosen itself seems to ride the fence, and it wants to play both sides on both sides of the fence. It wants to market itself as like a ministry, and so we're biblical. We are trying to promote the gospel. We're trying to all this kind of stuff, but they're also playing the other side. They're selling merch. I mean, you can't watch a single episode without Dallas Jenkins showing up for 45 minutes, hawking new sweatshirts and devotionals and music things. And I mean, you go on their website, it's just everything has their imagery plastered all over it. And I can almost guarantee if you were to release a shirt that said something like The Chosen in their font with those little fish, those little teal fish all over it, you'd probably get slapped by Dallas Jenkins with a trademark thing. It's because he wants to have his business cake and eat it too. He wants to play both sides against the middle. He wants to be viewed by Christians as a ministry, and he wants to say, aren't you concerned about the gospel? Aren't you concerned about the word of God getting out there? And then people are like, well, yeah, I am. He's like, well, then you should support us. And then the Christians are like, well, if my church, which I view as a valuable ministry, was partnering with certain, I won't even call them sects of Christianity. I mean, the big thing that Dallas Jenkins is getting himself in trouble with is with Mormonism, where he's kind of waffling. And from a business side standpoint, you can understand why. He doesn't want to alienate this entire market share, this group of people. But if you're going to sell yourself as a Christian business or a Christian ministry, what are you doing partnering with people who are not Christians, who are not biblical Christians? But see, he wants it both ways. And I think that's all of these Christian businesses. Well, we're just worship leader. We're this magazine that wants to promote this ministry of leading people in worship, but we'll sue you if your name gets too close to ours. It's like, come on. Either you're a Christian ministry, in which case submit yourself to 1 Corinthians 6, or you're a business, in which case, I mean, I guess, do whatever you want and let your Christian convictions, I guess, direct you. So it says, and continuing on in this article, it says, if a church is on the receiving end of a cease and desist letter, it should ask this question: does the church that sent the letter have an exclusive legal right to the name? If the answer is yes, then why be offended? Comply. Romans 13 obligates us to submit to the government laws like this, he wrote for CT's Church Law and Tax. So you see, it's like, if a church is telling you, hey, we're going to sue you for using our brand, that's a legal issue. See? Oh, the law courts, you got to submit to the law. What you're doing is illegal. It's like, why is you, as a company, why are you even, you're the one bringing the lawsuit before the court. Why? But it's because we live in this culture. It's like, if you put out music, it's going to be trademarked and it's going to fall under, and I don't necessarily blame musicians for this. I mean, someone who, I think the same thing we were just talking here, a group of us, about Bible translations. Who owns the rights to certain Bible translations? And if you open up, there's a copyright policy and there's copyright laws. If you quote if I was to do a podcast and have on here in written form, cut and pasted the entire text of like the book of Jude, if I just taught through the book of Jude on here, that would technically be in violation of biblical copyrights, because you're copying an entire book of the Bible from their copyright. It's like, this is ridiculous. But I understand, like, sometimes musicians are just like, I just want to make music and I want to bless the people of God with this music or this talent or whatever that I have. But it's the companies that capture them that are, I think, kind of corrupted. To me, I think it's all shameful. I think it's shameful when Christian musicians try to sell themselves as, godly, well-intended, altruistic servants of Jesus by saying, we're just writing this worship song for God's people, to lead people in worship. And then turning around and saying, well, yeah, but if you use it in your church, you're going to violate copyright infringements unless you, give all the credit and buy royalties. Some of this stuff is really confusing. I don't even know the laws because, I'll be honest, I frankly don't care. I think it's shameful if you're going to have that attitude, so I just play ignorant, and I just figure what I don't know can't hurt me. Ignorance is bliss. These Christian movies, I don't even know what the rules are on them, but like some of these Christian movies that get put out, you're supposed to buy, like if you're going to have like a church service and say, hey, we're going to have a showing of such and such movie, they're like, yeah, well, you got to buy the rights to do that. You got to buy a license to do that. And it's like, wait, you're going to say we are doing this for the glory of God and we're doing this ministry for the people of God, but give us money or we'll sue you? I mean, it's just, it's completely ridiculous. It's completely in violation, it seems like, of the spirit of 1 Corinthians 6. But as I said at the outset, I'm not necessarily saying like what's right and wrong. Of course, in these kinds of things, people are going to feel like, man, I feel slighted, I feel wronged, I feel whatever. Paul doesn't deny that, but he's saying, why are you doing this in front of the world? Excuse me, like why are you doing this in worldly law courts? This makes absolutely no sense. Settle this amongst yourselves in the church. This is not a criminal case where the law has to get involved. This isn't a crime against the state. We're not saying cover it up if somebody rapes or murders somebody and just deal with it in the church. No, turn those things over to the law. That's what the law exists for. But these defrauding cases and these things with money and business, it's just so unchristian. I mean, I don't know how the Christians who run these businesses look at 1 Corinthians 6 and don't feel like, wait a second, I'm violating this passage here. This is wrong. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about this. I mean, there's not a solution I can offer on what to do. It's just, I think it's a part of the system that we're stuck in. The way that Christians operate, the way that churches operate, they ride the fence, business and church. And if you cross the line in the business realm, well, we'll sue you. But in the Christian realm, we'll play the Jesus card and do things the way Jesus wants us to do. But on the business side, we'll sue you. I would like to think that if I ever get to the point where somebody's, stealing the name Faith, which I think Faith and Focus exists elsewhere on other podcasts, but if somebody's stealing it and the logo looks the same, I'd think, okay, well, whatever. I didn't invent those words. Whatever. I just don't care. I hope I would have the integrity to do that. But I think this is a Christian maturity problem, and I think that the immaturity exists because of the way that the Christian community, the church as a whole in the West, is structured. It cripples maturity. Issues like submission to church elders. If church elders was to say, don't bring this lawsuit, that's wrong, it would just be like, forget you, I'm going to do it anyways. So it's a submission problem. It's an immaturity problem. There's a pride issue involved. I think a lot of it comes, again, from the fact that the church has crippled its people, hasn't taught us how to apply a difficult passage like 1 Corinthians 6 to a difficult situation where maybe you're being defrauded and you're being wronged. I mean, nobody denies that those things are happening. So, again, take this for what it's worth. If you're in a situation like this, you need to bring it before the Lord and see what the Lord would have you do in these situations. And, I know it's not a super encouraging episode to end with the fact that, hey, all of the stuff is happening because the church is teaching people to be immature. It's not a very encouraging message. But I do think that that's at the heart of what is going on here. There's too much blending with the world system. And it's hard to separate ministry and Christian life when you're that enmeshed with the world system. So that's what I have for you today. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. And hopefully none of y'all sue me anytime in the future. And then we have to go to a 1 Corinthians 6 type situation. So again, hope you enjoyed this episode and you have a good one. While Faith in Focus is a ministry of mine as a missionary with InFaith, the views and opinions expressed, believed, or lived out by myself or those appearing in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the position, beliefs, or opinions of InFaith as a mission.